Between the 1920s and 1953, when he died, Joseph Stalin ruled the Soviet Union through crime and fear. He put in place harsh rules that caused terrible famines, put his enemies in jail camps, and killed people he thought were against him. How many people did Stalin really kill? It's hard to figure out the number. Because the terror of the Stalin years can't be summed up in a single number, many historians have had to piece together information from different sources, but different figures have come out. Researchers who looked at Soviet records before and after the fall of the Soviet Union say that Joseph Stalin killed between 6 and 20 million people. But because so many people died during the Stalin years and their deaths were often not recorded, it's possible that the real number is even higher. Joseph Stalin's path to power. Joseph Stalin, an individual who was born on December 18, 1878 in Gori, Georgia, under the name Joseph Bessarionis Yugashvili, appeared to be an improbable choice for the position of Soviet dictator. Stalin's early years were spent under the control of his aggressive and alcoholic father. Stalin was a small child with a face that was covered in pockmarks and a left arm that was malformed. But it was while he was attending Tiflis Theological Seminary that the future dictator began reading Karl Marx. This was the moment when he discovered his true purpose. With the message of Marx serving as a source of inspiration, Stalin dropped out of school in 1899 and began his spectacular rise as a revolutionary. The occasion was met by the man. Stalin joined the Bolshevik Party, grew close with Vladimir Lenin, and assisted in organizing strikes and demonstrations after renaming himself Joseph Stalin, or Man of Steel. Stalin attached himself to Lenin's coattails after the Russian Revolution of 1917, and in 1922 he became the General Secretary of the Communist Party. Lenin's rise to power was a direct result of the revolution. Additionally, Joseph Stalin took power after Lenin's death in 1924 and established himself as the dictator by the time the decade came to a close. As he looked out over the Soviet Union, he grew resolute in his determination to industrialize his nation and construct a communist economy that was completely communist, regardless of the cost. How many people did Stalin kill? Millions of people died in the Soviet Union because of Joseph Stalin's rules from 1929 until his death in 1953. How many people did Stalin really kill? Some scholars argue about the exact numbers, but most of the time they look at three things: famines, executions, and prison camps. Starting in the 1930s, Joseph Stalin started his collectivization program, which aimed to replace small farms with groups of people who worked together and were run by the government. According to the New York Times in 1989, Soviet historian Roy Medvedev said that these policies caused 9 million to 11 million of the more prosperous peasants to be driven off their lands and another 2 million to 3 million to be arrested or sent away. Many of these people died as a result. Medvedev also said that it was possible that 6 to 7 million people died in the famine that Stalin's policies of collectivization caused. But in the New York Review of Books, American researcher Timothy Snyder, who wrote a book in 2010 about the question of how many people Stalin killed, said that just 5 million people died because of Stalin's famines in 1930 and 1933. In either case, Stalin's policies caused terrible famines, especially in Ukraine, which was ruled by the Soviet Union. The famine in Ukraine in 1932 and 1933 is known as Holodomor, which means murder by starvation, and Ukrainians see it as a planned genocide. Many Ukrainian farmers fought Stalin's plans to turn farms into collective farms. People who were against the Soviets were called kulaks, and farmers who didn't meet their goals were punished by having their crops taken away, and thousands of them killed or sent away. Because of this, millions of people died of hunger. Stalin is said to have told Winston Churchill that he ordered the deaths of about 10 million kulaks. In the 1980s, a witness told Congress, "Some of the starving were in such bad shape that they had already started to stink. You'd see them walking around aimlessly, and one would fall, then another, and so on." Stalin also famously killed or jailed his opponents. The Soviet ruler killed up to 1 million people during the Great Purge, which was also known as the Great Terror. It happened from 1936 to 1938. He also sent many more millions to the Soviet gulags. 4 to 6 million people were sent to these kinds of camps, and many of them didn't come back. Medvedev's father was one of them. And Snyder, on the other hand, thinks that about 1 million people died in the gulags. The prisoners who died were either starved to death, worked to death, or were killed quickly. Since this is the case, it can be hard to say for sure how many people died in the gulags. Also, the Hoover Institution at Stanford University says that many authors of Stalin's gulags have written about how the camps often let out prisoners who were very close to dying to make their official death rates look lower than they really were. How many people did Stalin really kill? Medvedev thought that Stalin killed 20 million people in 1989, but he didn't have access to the government records. Snyder, who had access to Soviet sources, said that number was more like 6 million in 2010. There were other historians who thought Stalin might have killed millions more people, mostly before the fall of the USSR. Some people think that as many as 60 million people may have died while Stalin was in charge. That brings up a scary question. Was Joseph Stalin the most evil leader in modern history? Was Stalin history's most murderous dictator? In a tragic turn of events, Joseph Stalin was not the only dictator of the 20th century who committed murder. Although it is quite probable that Stalin was responsible for the deaths of more people than Adolf Hitler of Germany, who was responsible for the deliberate elimination of 11 million people, including 6 million Jews from Europe, Stalin did not kill the most people in the 20th century. Mao Zedong claimed ownership of that questionable title. At least 45 million people lost their lives as a direct consequence of his Great Leap Forward programs, which were implemented between the years 1958 and 1962, as reported by The Washington Post. According to historians' estimates, 45 million people lost their lives as a result of his Great Leap Forward initiatives over the period of 4 years. A number of other tyrants from the 20th and 19th centuries have death rates that are significantly lower, yet they are nevertheless frightening. For example, King Leopold of Belgium was responsible for the deaths of between 8 and 10 million people in the Congo, which was under Belgian rule at the time. According to estimates, Pol Pot's techniques of coercion resulted in the deaths of between 1.5 to 2 million people, which is equivalent to nearly a quarter of Cambodia's total population. He was intent on transforming Cambodia into an agrarian utopia. Therefore, when it comes to concerns concerning the number of individuals that Stalin was responsible for killing, the correct answer might never be known. The Soviet tyrant was responsible for the deaths of millions of people, most likely more than Adolf Hitler. When it came to comprehending such a large number of deaths, he appeared to have an understanding of the limitations that humanity possesses. 1 death is a tragedy. 1 million is a statistic, he allegedly declared, according to the International Business Times. The evidence about the number of people that Stalin murdered should be viewed with a great deal of compassion, despite the fact that doing so is challenging. Each life that he took was significant, regardless of whether he took 6 million or 60 million. These individuals were not mere statistics. Rather, they were human beings who had been slaughtered by a dictator from the Soviet Union. We hope you liked this video. Watch another video here.